The snow was coming down hard on this chilly December evening. Ferocious winds outside howled in a most unusual way, like some sort of wounded animal. Young Tim sat in his room, his belly full of supper, listening on, feeling equal parts curious and uneasy as his parents, aunt, and uncle were getting sloshed at the other end of the house. These family suppers usually ended up this way, a mostly uneventful dinner giving way to drunken revelry, and, in turn, time for Tim to retire to his room. His Uncle Dave was the worst of the lot. Tim wasn't sure he'd ever really seen him when he wasn't drunk, or half drunk at the very least. The discussion at the dinner table had covered everything from the weather, holiday plans, Tim's schoolwork, even Krampus, the horned demon who punished wicked children around this time of year. On this particular evening, Tim had been sent to bed early, his smart aleck mouth having gotten the better of him, as it tended to do. As soon as he got to his room, Tim flipped open a comic book, absent-mindedly thumbing through the pages, unable to ignore the storm outside, which seemed to be intensifying. He'd picked up the latest issue of Tales of Terror from the drugstore earlier in the week, but the raging wintry tempest made it difficult for him to focus. He flipped through the comic, glancing at page after page, but failing to settle for any given one. Vampires, werewolves, mummies, all crossed his vision. Somehow, none of those creatures made him quite as uneasy as simply being here in his room, listening to the dreary wind outside. What was different about this particular evening? Tim couldn't put his finger on it. He eventually reached the end of the comic, and there it was, a demonic being, wearing a black hood, reminiscent of the Grim Reaper himself. This finally ensnared Tim's gaze in a vice-like grip. Could it be that this image, that of this dark entity, was moving? Tim looked closer, and closer still, and then suddenly a flash of lightning made his heart jump several beats. A thunderstorm. But the weather had been clear all day. Was he imagining things? Tossing the comic aside, he rushed over to the window, peering out at the snow which swirled about in a demented dance. The winters here were usually a little nasty, but not like this. Tim gazed out at the forest that surrounded the small township where he and his parents resided. In the distance, the trees seemed almost alive as they swayed with the icy wind, illuminated only by the moon on this cloudless night. Something seemed odd about the way they moved, though. Was there someone or something out there rummaging through the woods? Tim silently stared out into the trees for several long moments. Then he saw it, a shadowy object moving behind the crooked trunks. Was his mind playing tricks on him? No, he was sure he saw something. Tim could already hear his mother's scolding voice. "You read too many of those monster books, young man." But he didn't care about possible punishments. This was too important, he thought to himself. He simply had to investigate and find out what this strange movement had been. What kind of detective would I be otherwise? Tim thought, for he dreamed of growing up to be an investigator of strange phenomena, a veritable Van Helsing. This was his chance to prove himself. He threw on his coat and boots, carefully putting his head against the bedroom door and listening intently. The drunken laughter still reverberated halfway across the house. Surely no one would miss him. This would take but a short while. He crept out of his room, down the hallway and out the back door, the cold immediately assaulting his senses like icy pins and needles on his skin. Slipping a woolen hat over his head, he trudged out into the snow, snapping on his trusty flashlight. What was that he had seen out there, lurking ominously in the trees? There was only one way to find out. Greetings from Krampus. a bite-sized fright. This series contains disturbing content. Listener discretion is advised. Tim plodded towards the nearby woods, scanning the foreboding, dense pines with his eyes, the beam of his flashlight flickering and bouncing off the brush. He had spent many a winter hunting with his father, and this had made him skilled when it came to watching for movement. There it was again, off to his right, something darting behind a nearby tree. Tim turned in its direction, picking up his pace a little, his breath visible in the bitter cold. He paused to listen, but he could only hear that same weird howling wind. He slowly approached the tree where he'd last seen the shadowy blur, veering off to one side and peered around gnarled, thick branches. Suddenly one of these branches cracked behind him with a loud snap as an imposing being, impossible to make out clearly, grabbed onto his foot with ferocious intensity. Tim shouted, dropping his flashlight and flailing against the thing holding him. He wriggled free and stumbled forward, losing his balance and tumbling into the snow. He quickly rolled over to see a towering, goat-like creature looming above him, silhouetted against the moonlight. The creature let out a distinctly human-like growl, then emitted a chuckle, which soon turned into full-blown laughter. The unknown assailant stepped forward, picking up Tim's flashlight and shining it upwards into its own grotesque face. Tugging at its skin, it pulled at the face, soon dislodging it. It was but a mask. Tim now quickly realized who this was. His Uncle Dave. "I'd been planning on scaring you with this, kid," Dave slurred, holding up the hideous rubber goat mask. "Was gonna wait till later, but..." Dave hiccuped and continued. "Went out here for a smoke, and when you followed me, figured I'd do it now." Dave chuckled again. "I got you good, didn't I? I bet you thought I was, Krampus, or whatever." "Krampus," Tim muttered, picking himself up and dusting the snow off his backside. He glared at his uncle, always with his stupid, drunken jokes, Tim thought to himself. "Come on, kid, I'm freezing my arse off," Dave yelled as he turned to stagger back to the house. Tim's mother was furious with the both of them when they returned, even more so when she found out that Tim's uncle and aunt were staying the night. She'd never been very fond of Dave, nor of his wife. Tim didn't blame her. Later that evening, when everyone had finally retired, Tim laid in bed, restless, unable to sleep despite the late hour. The wind outside was as loud as ever, snow swirling madly. He got up and walked to the window again, staring out into the woods. Nothing but snow, and shadow, and darkness. From across the house, Tim heard a loud thump, startling him. He gave an exasperated sigh, almost as if expecting that someone would hear him. It was probably drunk Uncle Dave again, getting a glass of water from the kitchen to try to wash out the booze, or whatever adults usually did. Not that it ever seemed to help. Tim returned to bed and closed his eyes, determined to finally get some rest. However, to no avail. He heard a sudden thump again, and a clattering. The latter made him bolt up out of bed once again. What on earth was his idiot of an uncle doing in there? Tim tiptoed to his door, opening it as slowly as he could to prevent it from creaking. The house was cold, still. No more sounds for the moment. Tim turned his ear toward the hallway that led to the other side of the house, listening intently. Another thump, followed by a faint jingling of bells this time. Tim furrowed his brow, another of his uncle's stupid pranks. He walked down the hall softly, coming to the kitchen, but to his surprise there was no one there. Tim sighed again. He turned back down the hall when, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a shadowy figure in the den near the Christmas tree. What was his uncle up to? Tim stepped into the den, the faint glow of the dying fire providing scant light in the room. The figure was hunched over, close to the family's ornately decorated tree, and looked unusual. He was dressed in a long red robe with a furry white trim, overly long and about 2 sizes too large, like some sort of bizarre Santa Claus outfit. The strange being, noticing Tim, stood up straight and seemed to tower over the boy. All was quiet, save for a heavy breathing, which sounded more like a hollow grunting. The two stood in mutual silence for several moments. "Uncle Dave?" Tim asked meekly. "What are you doing? It's not funny anymore." He looked up at who he thought was his uncle, staring directly into his eyes. It did look like him, but the eyes were empty and vacant. He must have drunk much more than usual, Tim thought. Still, he could not control the fear that was slowly overtaking him. The menacing figure took one deliberate step towards Tim, followed by another, then another, his feet thudding on the wooden floor, bells around his neck jingling and jangling from side to side. Tim glanced down at the floor and gasped, backing away. From beneath the flowing red robe emerged a cloven hoof attached to a leg covered in coarse hair. Could this really be his uncle? What had happened to him? The frightening figure paused, then drew a clawed hand up to its face, yanking the skin right off it in one swift motion. This wasn't Uncle Dave at all, but some sort of creature wearing a macabre disguise made of human flesh. Tim felt a sense of nausea and dread swelling in the pit of his stomach. He stumbled painfully backwards against the wall. The back of his head bumped into something. He heard a loud crash as a framed portrait fell to the floor, glass shattering around his feet. He felt the urge to scream, but no sound came from his mouth. The malevolent being took several more lumbering steps towards him, throwing back the hood of his robe. It was a goat-like, demonic-looking creature with crooked horns. It flashed a cruel smile, sharp fangs gleaming in the meager light, its long, serpent-like tongue lolling out of its mouth. Tim felt a cold wave of nauseating fear pass through him yet more intensely than before. What was this thing? He stood, paralyzed in fright. Krampus? That was just a fairy tale. I must be dreaming, Tim thought. It's just a nightmare. The creature reared back, holding a chain in its right hand. It was long and rusted, and appeared to be encrusted with dried blood. Before long, the metallic object came lashing down, cracking the floor in the process, the fiend wielding it as though it were a bullwhip. An otherworldly cackle pierced the air, and before Tim could move, the chain enveloped him and dragged him towards the creature. Foul stench and hot, heavy breath overpowered Tim as he struggled against the pull. "Help! Mum! Dad!" he managed to cry out, but to no avail. The beast slung him over its shoulder and took several thunderous steps towards a window overlooking the front yard. With a roar, the monstrous kidnapper suddenly leapt, smashing through the glass and soaring through the wintry air, before finally landing on the cold ground with a reverberating boom, scattering snow in all directions. The creature's hooves pounded the icy ground as Tim was carried away. He looked back in vain, not knowing where they were headed. As his home faded from view in the swirling snow, his cries were lost in the howling wind. There was a police investigation, and his parents put up missing person posters all over their small town, but to no avail. Tim was never seen again. The legend of Krampus likely dates back to pre-Christian times, originating from Central European folklore, although its beginnings are appropriately murky and mysterious. An anthropomorphic creature, half goat and half demon, bearing the name of Krampus, is said to punish wicked children during the Christmas holiday season. Some theories suggest that the origins of said creature go back to pre-Christian pagan times. In such ancient tales, he was said to be the son of Hell, ruler of the underworld, although some argue this origin is likely a modern invention. Somewhat fittingly, the actual name Krampus is derived from the German word Krampen, meaning claw. The exact origins of the Krampus we know today are still murky, however, and it is clear that the Yule goat of Norse mythology is also responsible for the manner in which this terrifying creature is portrayed in modern times. At some point, Krampus was assimilated into Christianity as a Satan-like entity, and by the 17th century, this foreboding being had been incorporated into many Christmas celebrations, and by the 1800s, Europeans were exchanging greeting cards featuring the sinister, goat-like creature, often using the phrase "Gruß vom Krampus," in English, "Greetings from Krampus." The cards often featured amusing rhymes or poems, and were mostly whimsical in nature, although they also typically portrayed Krampus preying on children. Some cards bore rather blatant sexual depictions, featuring Krampus lusting over buxom women. While portrayals of the creature have changed significantly over the years, modern versions of Krampus are often humorous and somewhat light-hearted, far less frightening than those of yore. Regardless, most depictions of Krampus have quite a few traits in common. He is hairy, brown or black in color, and has the hooves and horns of a goat. As he opens his malevolent mouth, a long forked tongue is exposed, along with the many sharp teeth with which he consumes naughty children. During the many festivals celebrating Krampus, revelers often dress in costumes fitting this description as they parade through the cities and villages. During Krampuslauf, for instance, festival-goers drink heavily, light torches, and roam the streets looking to cause mischief. It is traditional to offer these hooligans a Krampus schnapps, a stiff drink, much as you would offer dear old Saint Nick some milk and cookies. During Krampuslauf, for instance, festival-goers drink heavily, light torches, and roam the streets looking to cause mischief. It is traditional to offer these hooligans a Krampus schnapps, a stiff drink, much as you would offer dear old Saint Nick some milk and cookies. The most well-known celebration, however, is Krampusnacht, celebrated on the evening of the 5th of December, one day prior to the feast of St. Nicholas. While St. Nicholas delivers gifts to good children, Krampus instead carries lumps of coal intended for young ones of more disobedient dispositions. He also carries ruten, bundles of birch branches with which he occasionally thrashes younglings. In some versions of the legend, Krampus is paired with St. Nicholas. This seemingly jarring party of two visit children together, the former punishing the naughty and the latter rewarding the virtuous with presents. Krampus often carries a whip or chains, sometimes adorned with bells. It is said that these chains symbolize the binding of Satan by the Christian Church. Krampus may also appear with a sack or basket on his back. These containers are used for carrying away evil children, sometimes to a nearby lake, in order to violently drown them. Sometimes the nefarious demon instead collects the children as snacks, so that he might chew on their flesh, gnaw on their bones, and drink their blood when hunger and thirst overcome him. When the mood strikes him, as he seeks to punish particularly naughty children, he is even known to haul such little bastards away to the fiery depths of hell, ostensibly stealing away both their physical bodies and their souls in the process. As you can hear, the legend of Krampus is quite fragmented. The various tales often contradict one another and differ in several crucial ways. Having allegedly started out as a pagan entity, this demon was then recast as a malicious counterpart to St. Nicholas as Christianity gained a firm grip on the Western world. In the present day, however, this Christmas demon has taken on a life of its own. He has been incorporated into various forms of media over the years, including animated television shows such as The Venture Brothers and American Dad, video games such as Carnival and The Binding of Isaac, as well as movies such as the 2015 horror comedy simply entitled Krampus. What do you think? Is Krampus an invention of adults, primarily intended to scare ill-behaved children into obedience, a pagan beast whose earliest roots have since been mostly forgotten after his adoption by the Church? Or does this legend hold some grain of truth after all, as is often the case with such myths? Whatever this malevolent creature's true origins may be, his strangely ominous popularity is undeniable. When all is said and done, we suggest that you leave a little extra shot of schnapps out for Krampus before you drink your own in the process of celebrating this year's Krampusnacht, and pray that you don't find yourself on this demon's naughty list. We would love to hear your own thoughts and ideas about this creepy Christmas creature. If you have enjoyed this episode, please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Pixel Elixir, and on Instagram at Bite-Sized Frights. You can also subscribe at bitesizedfrights.com so that you never miss any of our terrifying tales. This has been a Pixel Elixir production, narrated by Chris K. Thank you for listening. Until the next bite, my friends.